He's a tough guy. It's been proven over the years.
Я с удовольствием встречусь с Дональдом, мы давно очень не виделись. И у нас нет никаких близких отношений, но все-таки предыдущие годы, за 4 года работы, когда он был президентом, мы встречались и ровно очень обсуждали наши межгосударственные отношения. Я с удовольствием с ним встречусь сегодня. Я думаю, что он тоже.
I've always gotten along with President Putin. I had a great relationship with him. And he went through the Russia hoax too. I mean, we used to talk about it. We used to say, it's too bad we really can't do anything between our countries.
Кстати говоря, что касается американцев, у нас же всегда были на протяжении очень длительного времени были очень добрые и своеобразные отношения с Соединенными Штатами. Мы же поддерживали их стремление к независимости от Великобритании. Мы реально поставляли оружие, даже поставляли, деньгами помогали и так далее. Потом Север поддерживали в ходе войны Север-Юг.
We've always had a good relationship. President Putin and I have always had a good relationship. That's why it's so sad that it happened. This would have never happened if I were president.
Россия никогда не отказывалась от контактов с администрацией Соединенных Штатов. И не наша вина в том, что прежняя администрация от этих контактов отказалась. С нынешним президентом США у меня всегда были деловые, исключительно деловые, но в то же время прагматические отношения и доверительные, я бы сказал. И я не могу не согласиться с ним в том, что если бы он был президентом, если бы у него в 2020 году не украли победу, то, может быть, и не было бы того кризиса на Украине, который возник в 2022 году.
It's not a question of liking Russia or not liking Russia. It was the G8, and I said, what are you doing? You guys, all you talk about is Russia, and they should be sitting at the table. I think Putin would love to be back.
Первые контакты с новой американской администрацией вселяют определенные надежды.
I've been saying that Russia has been easier to deal with so far than Ukraine, which is not supposed to be the way it is, but it is, and we hope to get Russia.
Часть западных элит по-прежнему настроена на сохранение нестабильности в мире. И эти силы будут пытаться сорвать или скомпрометировать начавшийся диалог. Мы это с вами видим. Нам нужно это учитывать и использовать все возможности дипломатии и специальных служб для срыва подобных попыток.
I think it takes two to tango, and you're going to have to make a deal with Russia. And they say, oh, Trump was nice to Russia. I wasn't nice to Russia. But you know what? Getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing. Getting along with these people is a good thing, not a bad thing. It's a smart thing to do.
Один Трамп такой человек, который в советах и рекомендациях не нуждается.
Понятно.
We're trying to do some economic development deals. They have a lot of things that we want, and we'll see. I mean, I don't know if that will come to fruition, but we'd love to be able to do that.
Пожалуйста, не сердитесь, я понимаю, что мы могли бы и больше поговорить, но так неловко заставлять себя ждать, там сейчас обидеться еще.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to the episode 17 of Cold War 2.0 with our dear friend, historian and political analyst, Dr. Tarik Cyril Amar. Today, we are going to discuss Putin-Zelensky talks in the UAE, or the potential ones, US-Russia backchannel diplomacy, India's strategic dilemma, Armenia-Azerbaijan corridor deal, and the European rearmament and nuclear ambitions. Dear Tarik, how are you doing today?
Fine. How are you, Kevork?
I'm good. Very happy to see you and excited about today's episode. There is a lot to unpack since last time we have spoken. I've been following the statements from the US officials and the Russian officials in the past few weeks, and we have moved from Trump saying that he wants a deal with Russia and he will end the Ukraine war in 24 hours and he's interested in peace with Russia, and then saying that Putin was a little bit stubborn and he's not getting along well with him after some phone calls, after saying previously that he was getting along well with Putin, and then he sent tactical nuclear weapons to the UK. And now this week we have the news that the US submitted alleged deal to Russia, and the Russians said this could be acceptable on their side. Could you please make a sense out of all these sense and crazy contradictory statements?
I don't think anybody can actually make sense of US behavior, but I think it's possible to speculate about what exactly has been going on here, and also to speculate, to guess what the chances are for any future development, in particular in the direction finally of peace, right? Because let's not forget one thing: this war is insane. It's all wars are insane at some level, generally speaking, but this one is especially insane, and continuing it is even more insane. This was an especially unnecessary war. It could have easily been prevented if the West had reacted constructively to Russian proposals, very specific proposals, and an urgent request to talk seriously submitted at the end of 2021. We had, of course, a relatively small conflict going on already at the time for several years, I'm well aware. But the massive escalation that happened then from February 22, that's the Ukraine war, which we are now talking about usually, right? That could all have been prevented. It could have been shut down rapidly within months in the spring of 22. And once again, the fault lies with the West and with the Ukrainians who listened to the West for not doing that. And the bitter irony, of course, for them is that at that point, they could have had a deal much better than what is coming now for them, right? Let's not forget, this war is insane. It needs to end. You don't have to be Donald Trump to understand that, right? This is one of the occasions where Trump is actually right about something. It doesn't happen that often. So what are the chances, right? One thing is we know, as you've stressed, that Trump is volatile. He's oscillating between, I really want to end this, and I'm serious, and I want, essentially, they're not using the term, but I want a new détente with Russia, right? An entirely new normal relationship. To, I don't like Putin anymore. He isn't nice to me. And then he whines for a while like a toddler. And then he goes back to, hey, actually, that Putin guy, he's not so bad, you know?
Yeah.
It's like having a 3-year-old going to kindergarten, you know, how they make friendships and break them and remake them. It's like,
And
bro,
also psychotic personality, like he has a different personalities.
course.
Every day he says something.
If you're like a 3-year-old at that age, you know,
Yeah.
something's wrong. But here's the serious side, right? Something at some point will become serious. We know this. Either he will seriously plunge for prolonging the war through the Europeans, most likely, which it looked like he was doing that for the last 2 weeks, or he will seriously plunge for actually making some sort of serious deal with Russia. Right? One of the two things is going to happen sooner or later. I'm not saying it has to happen now, but we are not going to be in this in-between state forever, right? The question is there now a chance that the better thing happens, that the war is actually going to be shut down? And of course, the two players that really are needed to agree here are Russia and the US. I understand that we all have been brainwashed with this stupid slogan, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. People who still believe in that, I need to explain something to them. Nothing has ever been decided by Ukraine alone. Nothing at all over the whole period. That's not the nature of a proxy war. Ukraine has always been a proxy. The slogan is nonsense. The real difference is between whether other people decide that Ukraine keeps fighting and Ukrainians keep dying for nothing that is worth it, or whether other people finally decide to end it. That's the real question here. This whole slogan about nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine is, I'm sorry, for idiots. So if this ends, it ends because the Americans and the Russians finally decide to do so. Here's the other side. The Russians are the opposite of volatile. They are. I'm not saying this because I want to be nice to them. It's just an empirical observation. The Russians have been very consistent in their approach to the war and how they want to end it. And that opens a big question that is very important now. If the Russians stay as consistent as they have been about these things, then in essence, the Americans would have to make great concessions to them, because if the Russians really don't budge from their positions, then somebody has to budge so that the two can come together, right? And then the Americans would twist the Ukrainians' arms and they will coup Zelensky if they have to make it happen in Ukraine, right? So that would be done. The question is, are the Americans ready to do this? Here's a second question, and at that I leave it for now. I don't want to go on and on, but if the Russians are now saying, as Ushakov, an extremely important aide to Putin, has said in public before journalists, the Americans made an offer that we find very acceptable. What is that offer? It has to have something to do with territory. One thing I can really not see is the Russians giving up most of the territory they have conquered. What would surprise me is if the Russians are ready to give up serious pieces of it. That would surprise me. That would be really a new one, right? But let's not totally rule it out. What is possible is also that the Russians might be ready to say, we keep everything we occupy right now, but we don't insist on our current claim to more. Because this is what a lot of people have to understand. The Russians officially already claim a little more than they currently control. They're constantly advancing, so they're constantly getting closer to actually controlling what they claim, but they're not quite there. If the Russians are ready to finesse the territorial issue, something can happen. If the Americans are ready to make major concessions there, this is not about Crimea. Crimea is done. They will have to concede Crimea anyhow. The question is what happens to the other 4 districts we are talking about, right? So if the Americans go a long way to meet the Russians, maybe they can talk. If they're not, I don't see this go anywhere. Second thing, what is going on the economic level? Now, Kirill Dmitriev is a man you need to watch. He is the point man on the Russian side for the economic side, and he's a super dove. He always wants peace and cooperation because he sees the commercial and trade advantages, which are real, actually, right? They could emerge. Is it the case that the Americans are offering very interesting things in the economic sphere? I don't know, but I think they will have to. Then, last thing that I think is absolutely indispensable, the NATO issue. People should not forget a key reason for the Russians to go to war was the fact that NATO tried to expand into Ukraine, which was an awful idea and should never have happened. The Russians up until now have said, we will only stop fighting once NATO officially says Ukraine will never get in. Now, here's the complication. On one side, I'm sure they will never give up this war aim. Never. It's central. But on the other hand, there are 2 complications. Every single NATO state can actually block this, because to get a new NATO member in, you need full consensus. Yes. Everybody has to agree inside the organization. Is it possible that the Americans would say, we can't give you that, but we promise you that we, the Americans, will never say yes? That would bury it immediately. Then there's another, even trickier wrinkle in this. The Russians have said again and again, we don't trust the West. They break every promise. They even break written treaties. So you could almost see, and this is a very weird thought, I know, but you could almost see somebody in Russia thinking counterintuitively, why are we insisting so much on that promise about NATO? Because we can't believe anything they promise us anyhow. Yes, we have said you must put it in writing now. But if we are honest with ourselves here in Moscow, we know that writing doesn't mean anything to these guys anyhow. Do we really need an American president to say they will never get into NATO because we don't know how long this guy is going to be in office? We don't know what his successor is going to do, right? So if Western promises and treaties are worth nothing, this casts a very peculiar light on this whole promise us not to put Ukraine into NATO thing, right?
Yes.
Maybe by now the Russians prefer to say, look, we don't care what you promise us. If you try again, we will attack again. That's the status quo, right? Who knows? Who knows? I'm speculating, right?
And that's why Trump always said, this is Biden's war, this is not my war, this is the Democrats' war. And what if the next president is from the Democratic Party.
Indeed.
What happens? Do they not abide by the agreement, just like it happened with the JCPOA and many other agreements, and then an administration changes? Like this is a serious matter, because such strategic agreements has to last, and this regardless of what administration and what government is ruling, basically. It doesn't. In the United States, this is the game they're playing between it's a uniparty system, but they're giving the illusion, depending on the priority, that they have different poles and different interests in the US administration. No, this decision-making is happening or being planned by the deep state in the United States, regardless of who is the president and who is in Congress. Those are strategic wars. Not some president, not some individual is deciding whether to go to war or to strike a deal or a peace deal in this case. And you mentioned this as, of course, rightfully so, it's a proxy war. And they have fooled the Ukrainian people for a long time that this is about the Ukrainian people and this is about Ukraine. However, we have now a poll basically that the Ukrainians lose appetite for war and they support negotiated peace. So 69% of Ukrainians seek a negotiated end of the war as soon as possible. Only 24% want to continue fighting the war until victory. This is according to Gallup polling. Now, we see that there is some probably breakthrough to the negotiations. One of the commentators say that, do you think that the submarine move by Trump has gotten Putin nervous so that he is now coming to agree the deal?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Look, hiding submarines in the sea, right? Some of them, in case of a nuclear conflict, or in case of any conflict, not all of them carry nuclear weapons, but hiding submarines in the sea has two main functions for powers like Russia and the US, for instance. One is, at the beginning of a conflict, they're supposed to help surprise the opponent. And that doesn't have to be nuclear. They would shoot like medium-range rockets, missiles, it would shoot cruise missiles, and so on, right? And at the end of a nuclear conflict, when we are all dead, right? This is probably going to run by computers at that point. At the end of a big nuclear conflict, there is another class of submarines where their task is to finish everyone off. I'm not making this up. They're the reinsurance submarines. So what they're basically saying, when you are the US or Russia, you have these big submarines which can essentially kill a continent. One of them, look up their loads. They can essentially wipe out a continent with the missiles they have, right? So these submarines are so that you can tell your opponent, even if you surprise us, even if you defeat everything else we have, these submarines you will never find. And they mean that in the end, we will take you with us. That's the big nuclear submarines. That's their function, right? Total suicide mission.
Thank you so much for the optimism, dear Tarik. Really,
I'm not saying it's ever going to happen. But here, look, after this little excursion, it was too long. But let me say one thing. These things are in the sea all the time. Some of them are also, in various harbors and being dealt with. But some of them are in the sea all the time. It's very normal that they're there. There's nothing special in saying, I've repositioned them to a special location. They're always in locations where they could hit the enemy. Always. That's their function, right? It's a completely bizarre move. And the Russians, of course, couldn't take it seriously. I mean, also, look at the context. He said that in response, literally, to a tweet, right? Medvedev tweeted something Trump didn't like. And he said, I've got to send two submarines into the pertinent regions, and I'm not telling you where. And of course, the Russians tweeted back, and you had all these memes then in the Russian internet saying, where did you send them? Epstein Island, right? He had that coming. So they don't take that seriously. That's theater, and they know it. They know it very well. Equally, but you raise a very important issue, this listener or this viewer. You have to ask, and you're right, recent American military moves, have they made a difference? And the second one you can think of is that they very ostentatiously, demonstratively shipped tactical nuclear bombs, essentially, to the United Kingdom again, right? That was this other move. And there, again, I would be very skeptical. I think this is all well below the Russian pain threshold, right? That doesn't impress them. These are not serious enough moves. I see these moves much more as directed at the Western public, at the US public, but also in part at the Europeans, that is, the European vassals of the United States. They're not really relevant for Russia. I doubt that very, very much.
I just want to thank our dear friend Red Access, first of all, for the brilliant job he is doing, basically, for moderating the live chat and creating a healthy environment for the people to come and have respectful and insightful discussion and conversations. I really hope, Tarik, that one day you could see the chat. It's brilliant. People are really engaging with each other. People agree and disagree. As long as you guys are not cursing each other and you are not bringing each other's mothers and sisters into the discussion, everything will be all right. So stay on the track. We are doing great on this, okay? We have lots of talk nowadays, Tarik, about India. And there was an article in the Telegraph says India could end the Ukraine war tomorrow, but Modi needs to pick a side. But I'm going to show you this video of Trump. Basically, he was asked why he singled out India. Basically, there are so many other countries buying Russian gas and oil, but why India? This is what he said.
Indian officials have said that there are other countries that are buying Russian oil.
It's okay.
Like China, for instance,
It's
buys
okay.
more.
Yeah.
Why are you singling India out for these additional sanctions?
It's only been 8 hours. So let's see what happens over the next.
Sanctions.
You're going to see a lot more.
So this is a taste of
You're going to see a lot more. You're
Mr.
going to see so much secondary sanctions. Yes, ma'am.
So on the India penalties, do you have any similar plans to enact more tariffs on China as it relates
Could
to
happen.
their purchases?
Could happen. Depends on how we do. Could happen.
Mr. President, China is facing potential secondary sanctions for
Yeah.
Russian oil. Them having that tariff or sanction rather or not hinges on what going forward.
It may happen. I mean, I don't know. I can't tell you yet, but we did it with India. We're doing it probably with a couple of others. One of them could be China. Yes.
Are you keeping that 10 to 12-day deadline that you had given Russia after today's talks?
Yeah, we're pretty much getting close to it right now, but we're having very serious talks right now about getting out of Ukraine, getting it settled, getting it ended. Should have never started, would have never started. If I were president, it would have never started.
Yeah. Anyways, India. What can India do for the United States? Why should India do anything for the United States in that matter when it comes to Ukraine?
There is no reasonable reason why. But, right? Okay, but no, there isn't. But there is American demands and how they, in quotation marks, think about them. So the idea is, I think the main idea here is that India is buying Russian oil, refining the Russian oil, and then re-exporting that Russian oil to the world market, including, by the way, to the West, right? Which has sworn not to use Russian energy anymore.
Yes.
So India is supposed to either stop doing that or decrease doing that. And in fact, unfortunately, I would say, but I understand why they are saying this, the Indians themselves, the Indian government, has made some statements saying that they're ready to talk about at least a decrease in this practice, right? Because India is in a very, very difficult situation, of course. Now, what the Telegraph is writing, that India, by that step, if they were to take it, could immediately end the war in Ukraine. That is, it's delusional. You know, that's people who write stuff like that. I mean, they really belong in a loony bin.
Let's make him more famous. What's his name of the author? Let's see.
It's
Tim
not
Collins.
from this. It's not from this world. Even if India did everything the West or the US demand here, or the Telegraph demands here from London, the war would, of course, not stop. Because one thing we have learned is that all these Western delusions of you only have to push this economic button or that economic button, and Russia is going to collapse, or it's going to be under so much pressure that they finally have to do exactly what we want. We've been through this now for years. It started even before the 22 escalation. And the one lesson everybody really should have learned empirically now, this is not opinion, we've tested this, is that all these recipes don't work. What happens with this type of economic warfare in every single instant, right, is that Russia takes a hit, yes, usually the hit is much smaller than the people in the West have predicted. And then Russia also adapts. Sometimes Russia adapts so well that that's actually in the end on balance advantageous for Russia. Right? This is the real process we have seen. We are on European Union sanctions packet number 18 by now.
I lost the count.
The Russians are only laughing about this. I'm watching the news shows, and they're also like 18, 17. We don't know. So definitely this economic warfare. And look, smart people or people who were not drinking the Kool-Aid, right? Some smart people even said this right at the beginning. They were making a very simple argument, which is, look, whatever you think about sanctions, and sanctions are generally a very bad idea, but whatever you think about them, you will never defeat an economy like Russia with sanctions. And there's something we need to talk about here as well. I really want to bring this up in this context. You find people, even nowadays, again, who go on and on about how Russian GDP is equivalent to that of Spain. Right? Say, oh, look at this Russia. They look so big and so mighty, but the GDP is really just that of Spain. Right? Poor Spain, by the way, right? To be treated like that. But the reality is, of course, totally different, right? There's a very good originally Irish journalist who now works in Russia, and he has actually pointed this out again and again.
Bose.
No, this isn't Che Bose. This is another guy. But he has pointed this out again and again. These GDP comparisons are based on raw GDP data, which are completely useless for many complicated, not so complicated reasons, actually. You can look it up. They're useless. They don't tell you anything. The minimum you have to do, and that isn't even enough yet to get a realistic picture, is you have to use purchasing power parity data, right? And once you do this, which gives you at least a more realistic image, the Russian economy is actually one of the largest of the world. It's in fourth place, actually, right?
This is what we're talking about, right?
Yes. Brian McDonald, there he is, exactly. And he's explained this again in a post today. He's explained it many times before. The poor man, he has to. But this is very important to understand. When people thought they could target Russia with sanctions, they took on an extremely big and actually resilient economy led by a very competent state. Forget all of these idiotic prejudices about Russia that, Russia is sort of, they're slovenly and they can't get things organized. The opposite is the case. I've said this before, I say it again. If you compare the European Union and Russia is miles ahead in state efficiency. And I would even apply this to, for instance, Germany and Russia. I seriously believe that by now the Russians are running the more efficient state, not the Germans. Forget all the old prejudices.
No, please ask me about the efficiency here in Germany. If I start about that, if we talk about the German efficiency, what we talk in the offline, in the online,
don't get yourself into trouble again.
I will end up deported. I will just shut up. Guys, this is at the mid of every show we do. As you may know, we do this show every Friday at 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. This show is called Cold War 2.0. We do it always with our dear friend Tarik Cyril Amar. And if you see this, what is scrolling now in the screen, and this is a special offer from our dear friend Tarik. If you subscribe to Tarik's Substack today on the 8th of August and tomorrow on the 9th of August, you will get 20% off a new annual subscriptions. The link is already scrolling on the screen. If you can't just follow the link on the screen, it's already copied and pasted in the description below. You can just open the description and click on that link and go to the special offer page. And since you are already now probably checking in the description, on your way, that would be also amazing if you just hit the like button, because of every 4 people watch this stream, let's say only actually the ratio is crazy different. 10,000 people on average watch these videos we do with Tarik, and around 1,000 people hit the like button. I assume that the 9,000 of them out of laziness, so I would encourage you to hit the like button to help this show to grow. Thank you so much. Tarik, let's move to another region, which is very important, is in the Southern Caucasus. And we have news now that Trump will strike a peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And one of the issues discussed during this so-called peace agreement is the Zangezur corridor. And Zangezur corridor, as our friend Alex says, is part of a strategic route extending from Baku to Turkey, passing through Armenia near the Iran border. Today, Armenia leases its territory to the US for 99 years. US and Iran border. Turkey one step closer to taking the corridor needed to connect to Azerbaijan. So we are basically, America is on the borders with Iran, and Iran's president was in Azerbaijan hugging Aliyev the other day. I think he doesn't really know what is going on the northern border of Iran in this case. Could you please tell us what this could change on a geopolitical level in the Southern Caucasus?
Yeah, I will immediately. Let me add one thing which I should have mentioned immediately when we talked about India, because I don't want to make it all about the British and their crazy illusions, right? It's important to see that India is actually pushing back. Let's just add that, right? For instance, just today, this is very recent news, it's come out that the Indians have essentially suspended for now major arms contracts with the United States. And you have to understand that India has always been in this very complicated but extremely sophisticated foreign policy situation where they've balanced between the East, US, and it used to be the Soviet Union, now the Russians. The Russians are offering very advanced weapon systems to the Indians as well. They used to be the main supplier. That has been shifting westward, but the Indians are now essentially threatening to go back more to Russia once again. So this is an open issue. I just wanted to add that the Indians aren't passive here. Don't get me wrong, right? So about the Zangezur corridor and Azerbaijan and Armenia and Iran, and there is another power we should mention here as well, Russia, right? I still believe that the Zangezur corridor project, which is now, really gathering speed, is targeting two countries the most. One is Iran, very obviously, but the other one is Russia. And you have to see that Russia used to have significant influence in Armenia. That influence has been reduced greatly over recent years under Nikol Pashinyan. Russia, as just a few years ago, 5-10 years ago, still had a project of its own for linking Azerbaijan with, in the end, Turkey, which is what this is really about, right? And that would have been via what used to be the Caucasus Railway. The Caucasus Railway already exists. It was suspended, so to speak, in 1992, right? But that corridor, that infrastructure, if a little dated, already exists. It's far north of the Zangezur corridor, right? But it would have been easy technically to revive and modernize that. That was an option, and Russia was clearly thinking about this. Then, of course, the Iranians, this is even more overlooked, also are offering a corridor. They call it the Aras corridor. So that's 60 miles or kilometers south of the Zangezur corridor and would go through Iran. So it's important to understand that Iran is not being obstructive here. Iran has never said, oh, if you want to connect Azerbaijan to, in the end, Turkey, we will not help you, we will be in your way. The opposite is true. The Iranians have long said, we want to be a corridor, we want to create a corridor through our territory, and you can work with us. So these two things show you very clearly that the whole Zangezur project is very aggressively directed against both Iran and Russia. To Russia, it says, stay out, we don't want you here anymore. And Iran, it basically threatens with an immensely dangerous American and Western presence on its northern border, right? Now, one thing I would like to add at the end. It looks pretty bleak right now. I would call it bleak. I don't think this is a good idea. because it won't work well. It's not a stable solution because it is so antagonistic to two major players in the region. But you can't forget that the Zangezur corridor, or any such corridor solution, right, linking ultimately Turkey and Azerbaijan, depends to its east on the Caspian Sea. Don't forget that the Caspian Sea is in the back of all of this.
Yes.
And in the Caspian Sea, both Iran and Russia still have influence because they both border on it. So it's very hard to predict how well this will work. But there is a scenario in which if Russia and Iran were to play hardball, get really aggressive, they would use their presence in the Caspian Sea to stymie the whole Zangezur corridor project, or at least decrease its efficiency massively. They may not choose to do that. They may have their reasons to come to an arrangement. But currently, this is the last important point to note here. Currently, the Iranian position is irreconcilable. The Iranians, the National Security Committee of the Iranian parliament, in 2024, last year, officially already said, this is a red line. They used that term. This is a red line in terms of our national security. The Zangezur is not a thing. Don't do it. And they have essentially repeated this at various levels, right? So right now, Pashinyan may be hugging with the president of Iran. But there is also a lot of very powerful voices out of Iran that say we are not accepting this. However, again, one last twist. This is, of course, all within the context of the great weakening of Iran because of the reduction of the axis of resistance, which ultimately goes back to Israeli and US aggression, right?
Yes.
And so this is basically exploiting this moment again.
Tarik, I want to ask you if you agree with my evaluation when it comes to Iran and Russia. And that is, if we consider this global geopolitical affairs a chessboard, in my opinion, at least at my lifetime, Iran and the Russians were always on the reaction mode. Like they're on the defense mode and they get hit and hit and hit, and then they hit back in a reactionary manner instead of planning on creating a change in a situation or in a country such as Armenia. Like the United States, the UK, the West, the EU, they have lots of soft power. They have a lots of NGOs, they have a lots of educational programs, the Erasmus, they have TV outlets, they have PR firms, they have media outlets, and they are capable of even creating this illusion in any country that the change is spontaneous, it's organic. The people have changed their mind. They have moved from one camp to another, but this was engineered from outside after decades of, let's say, indoctrination of the people. Like in this case, you say, Iranians said, this is a red line for us. I mean, the Russians also had their own project, but now the Americans were able to materialize this after how many years? Since 2018, Pashinyan came after the color revolution. Today we're 2025. 18. So after 7 years of this color revolution, it's a major shift in the geopolitical landscape in the Southern Caucasus. And the Russians and the Iranians, this is what I'm trying to explain. It's like a dinosaur who is like, they can't move but slowly, and once they move, they will move militarily to change the situation once again. But the Americans, they can do it on the long term, slowly but surely through soft power and hard power, right? And that's why when I criticize Tehran and Moscow in this case, people come and say, do you know better than the politicians there? No, but these politicians are humans. They can hit and miss, right? And in this case, I believe that there are so many cases that they had to withdraw, like in Syria, for example, and now from Armenia, and the Americans are scoring points. So this is my opinion about multipolarity, that the players who claim creating a multipolar world, they are not taking the initiative, the geopolitical initiative to change realities in different places. China is doing in Africa, but the Russians and the Iranians are not doing much. This was my humble opinion.
You know, I share that fear, at least. I also believe there is a real possibility that for various reasons, the main powers that stand to benefit from the emergence of the multipolar world, and that should sort of lead the process of emergence, they will have to, that they are not proactive enough. And once again, I don't want this to be sort of a cheap criticism from the sidelines, but as you rightly say, everybody is human, nobody is perfect. I give you an example. What you just said made me think of something that Putin has actually admitted by now. And whatever you think about the Russian approach, political approach, the policy is toward the Western attempt to capture Ukraine geopolitically, as it were. Putin has recently, I can't give you an exact date, but he has done this repeatedly. He has publicly stated that if he made a mistake, then it was to act too late. To act too late against this Western encroachment. Now, obviously, if you fundamentally disagree with everything the Russians have done, then you won't share this particular sentiment of Putin anyhow. But if you try to at least think through the way that the Russians see this, which I think one should always try to do, then you can see where he's coming from. And it makes, on their terms, whatever you think about them, but on their terms, it makes sense. So there you have Putin actually admitting what you've just described, that we have been too reactive. That's another way of saying we are too reactive, we are too late, too reactive, right? And I fear this could be a pattern. I would add one thing, which is that Iran, I mean, in a way, although they have problems with their president, I would say, they have also done a lot. It just hasn't been enough, and they are really just a middle power. They are demographically much, much bigger than Israel. They're militarily very significant, actually, in their own way, which a lot of people underestimate. But they are ultimately a middle power, and they live under horrific, crippling sanctions, right? Which, of course, ultimately constrains everything they can do because it constrains what they have available in monetary resources and wealth. Russia is a complicated case. Russia has been resurging since basically the very late 90s, the early 2000s, right? This is a quarter of a century ago, and by now many of the results of the resurgence are in. One result is that Russia has withstood the West. If Russia will ultimately win the war in Ukraine, as I think it will, then Russia will have defeated the West. Never forget that. They know that. They will have defeated the West because we, the West, have made a point to join the fight. And once you join the fight, when the fight is lost, you lose it too, right? So Russia actually, there's quite something going on there. But I do think they're operating at their limits. And that's ultimately a huge drawback, it's a side effect of the Ukraine war. Again, whatever you think about this war, but from Syria to Iran to Armenia, I believe you can see that Russia doesn't have much left. They have to focus on this one war against the West that the West has imposed on them, I would actually argue. They haven't just provoked the Russians, they have actually forced them to fight this war. Right? This whole nonsense about the unprovoked Russian attack, that's really, forget it, please. So here's another thing, my last point. If the Russians really should end the war together with the Americans, if they should wind down the Ukrainian war, one, I think, helpful thing for the balance in the world as a whole would be that Russian resources would be freed up. Right now, in many areas, Russia is on the retreat because they have to focus on Ukraine so much.
Yes. I just hope that our friend Kai, he said, or she said, I'm not sure he or she, but wanted to leave because it's 2 a.m. in the local time. I just wanted to thank for the generous support. Thanks, Tarik and Kevork. Keep up the pure journalism. We promise you we will do as long as our this channel is still up. And remember, this channel moved from having a warning strike, we received the strike, into lifting the strike, into the verification of the channel. It happened in a matter of 2 weeks. I received a strike from YouTube, a warning, and the lady contacted me threatening to demonetize my channel. And then YouTube on X contacted me. They solved the situation because this was absurd. I didn't do anything wrong.
Mhm.
And afterwards, they have given me the badge, this verification badge on YouTube, which
excellent.
it doesn't give you any, let's say, privileges, but at least people know that this channel is now verified. I hope this would immune the channel basically from further absurd warnings. And I have contacted the legal firm. Our dear friend Tarik also recommended me a few. I contacted one, Tarik, and they promised me that any problem I would have in the future with YouTube, they are ready to solve it. And that's why I'm going to do this, what is called Rechtsschutz, which is something. Yeah, like it's some. Yeah, it's like an insurance you pay monthly. So if you have any legal problems or you need to hire a lawyer, as this exists nowhere but in Germany, you must have this.
I don't know, but you must have it. Yeah, I have one. That's
so I'm having one very, very soon. And so that in the near future, when this YouTube becomes my only profession, let's say between quotation, that's when I will need this Rechtsschutz so that I can guarantee also the income and YouTube's let's say good treatment, because that's how they are basically interacting when you have a lawyer, and a good lawyer in this case. There is an investigation, Tarik, I'm going to share with you. This is very interesting because this shows how important is Armenia in the eyes of many, including Germany. And this is an investigation published by Resist, Expose, Subvert, Transform, REST. It's a media platform focused on threats to democracy. Germany may be actively interfering in Armenia's internal affairs through its network of 6 state-funded politische Stiftungen, or political foundations. These organizations, including the Konrad Adenauer, Friedrich Neumann, Heinrich Böll, and Rosa Luxemburg foundations, are allegedly engaging in systematic political manipulation in Armenia via 697 million euros taxpayer-funded apparatus. REST points to a sharp uptick in activity ahead of the 2018 Velvet Revolution, so the color revolution, which brought Pashinyan to power. Konrad Adenauer Foundation opened a Yerevan office in 2016. Heinrich Böll followed in 2017. Future leader Nikol Pashinyan attended their 2016 South Caucasus Dialogue event. REST claims this network building served German geopolitical interests, not Armenian national development. Foundations allegedly gain access through meeting with officials, doctoral scholarships, public grants, and policy-oriented events. For example, Friedrich Neumann Stiftung's EdCamp Armenia 2020 offered a platform for educators and policymakers, but REST sees this as a strategic inroad to influence education policy. While these organizations promote themselves as champions of democracy and human rights, REST argues they test soft power tools under the cover of legality, compromising Armenia's democratic autonomy. Germany isn't alone. Armenia hosts one of the largest US embassies, Russia's 102nd military base in Gyumri, strategic energy partnership with Iran. Armenia is a crossroad of global influence. Its future depends on leaders who can navigate foreign interests without compromising national sovereignty. What do you think, strategic partnership or soft colonialism? I think the answer is clear why all these Stiftungen are investing in Armenia, especially among the intellectual class. And this has been proven over and over again when I bring the example of Syria, because I'm from Syria. Apparently, Tarik, all the geniuses in Syria, all the smart people in Syria were on the side of anti-Assad camp, including my colleagues and my friends. It seems they're the only ones who deserve the scholarships. They're the only ones who got these jobs in the think tanks, and they have written books. So also these think tanks apparently are becoming more compromised, or like they're becoming also tools of soft power. Like this is no longer about NGOs, PR, also in academia nowadays.
No, it's massive. But it's actually a very old game, right? It exploded in my perspective because I'm focused on what used to be the post-Soviet space, right? It's getting a little late for calling it that, but we know what we're talking about, right? And in my experience, This is a thing that stretches back decades, well into the Cold War, right? It didn't only come about with the post-Cold War period that began in the 90s. It actually goes back right into the Cold War. The massive politicization of these structures, think tanks, later NGOs, and similar things. I'm not saying they are all dirty players, but a lot of them are. Some of them are outright fronts for intelligence organizations and similar things, and some of them are in a gray area, and then there may be a few clean ones, but you have to be very skeptical. Georgia, apart from Armenia, is, for instance, a massive example. And I mentioned Georgia because people have written very well about Georgia and done really good research. There's an article by two authors. One is Georgian herself, and the other one is, I think, based in America at least, Rochovansky and Soporidze. I'm not quite sure, but people can Google it. And these two have really written very well on how this whole massive NGO scene in Georgia has distorted and in many ways, I would say, poisoned their politics. All right. I feel that what people often don't understand in the West is that what has happened is that we, the West, have come in with enormous amounts of money, that in these often impoverished, desperate societies after the collapse of the Soviet system, these things made differences that changed lives. They changed lives. If you were a young scholar and you got onto a big, nice grant from Soros, or you got into the right sort of relationship with a German foundation, your life was different. And you would try keep doing that, right? If you had suddenly several millions on your hand to run a project on local government in Tbilisi, right? You were rich by comparison with almost everybody else, including people in the official state apparatus, right? So we massively influenced these societies, and we didn't do it in a clean, unbiased way at all. We were open about the fact that we were promoting what we were calling our values. But values, of course, was a euphemism for our points of views and our politics and our policies, and very much also our economic and strategic interests, right? Let me make one last point, because the post you read out made me think of that. Look, having a military base of another state on your territory is not a simple thing and can be very bad, right? I mean, I'm German, I know about it. But it is not, I think, per se, as in itself, it isn't necessarily as insidious and toxic as these NGOs. Because the military base principally is a clear-cut thing. You know, the military, they're coming in with their hard power. They're showing you what they're about. The NGOs, that's subversion. That's buying you. That's corrupting you, right? And I've become extremely skeptical towards this scene.
Yes.
I haven't always been like that. I was a phase in my life for 3 years where I wasn't working for an NGO, but I was in touch with that scene because I was running a research institute in Ukraine. But I have really changed my views on the whole NGO scene, on the whole think tank scene. I think most of it should be actually abolished and repressed.
Defunded. I
Yes.
wanna tell you a story. I don't know if I told you this story before, but I told the audience of Syriana Analysis some time ago, maybe a year or 2 years ago. When I first arrived in Germany, this was in 2015. So I had an asylum in Germany, and in 2016 I started learning German. And during this time, my German teacher, who is a very good person and a really great friend of mine, he said that he knows a program in an academia, and I'm not in an institute, basically, which grants scholarships to 5 scholarships per year to Syrians who have asylum in Germany. And the master program is media studies. And I thought, look, after studying international relations, political science, it would be brilliant, right? To start your life in Germany by probably getting a scholarship in Master of Media Studies. So I would get into the media scene here, because the naive in me in 2016 thought I'm here in a free society, or free, let's say, landscape, where you can express your opinions. And I applied to this scholarship, I swear to God, and they responded to me in a few hours later via email, and they were like, "We were so impressed by your CV. We would like to have a phone call with you, etc. When are you available?" And we agreed on tomorrow, the next day. So they called me. We had around 1 hour conversation on the phone. There were 4 people sitting there listening on the conversation. They were asking me questions about my career and my journalistic background, and where I studied in Syria, where I studied in Lebanon, where I studied in Paris. And they were like, "This is fascinating. This is what we're looking for, you know, like these are the credentials we're looking for to grant scholarship." I was like, I was so optimistic. And the woman who talked to me, she said, we will send you a final confirmation in 2 weeks. I said, okay. And 2 weeks later, I received an email saying,
that's
basically,
when they checked you out.
unfortunately, the competition was very, very tough, and they were better candidates, right? And remember, Tarik, in 2016, I don't like to use the term famous, but nobody knew who is Kevork. And I just had a Facebook account. I didn't have my YouTube channel.
No, they checked you.
I had a modest presence on Facebook and Twitter back then. So apparently they did a background check, and they came back to me saying, like, the competition is tough. Unfortunately, you couldn't make it through. And I said, okay, thank you very much for the opportunity, and hopefully in the future. I thought really, like, the competition is tough. And this was like 8 months later. I was talking to a friend, and she, from the conversation, she told me, like, she's doing a master in a program, and she gave me the title of the program, and like, wow. I applied to this program, right? And I said, "Did you receive?" She's also Syrian, and she was she had an asylum here. And I said, "Did you receive a scholarship?" She said, "Yes." I said, haven't you studied English literature? She said, "Yes." I was like, "How? Like, you studied English literature? They accepted you in the media, like this media study?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Look, I applied for the same program, and they told me the competition is tough, and we couldn't select you." And she called me right away because we were chatting. She said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Kev, with the 5 people, including myself, if we combine the experiences of our 5 people together, we don't have 10% of your background and your media experience. If we combine us, 5 of us."
You went kicked out for political reasons.
Exactly.
But it's actually nice that she told you, because a lot of people wouldn't have that honesty to actually,
Actually, she gave me the names of the people who were accepted, and they were the 4 of them, excluding her, because she was like silent mode. She never had a political opinion online. But the other 4, they were very vocal anti-Assad activists who had the presence on the social media.
But Kevork, I think what you're describing is one example of something that has been going on I really mean it, a mass scale for decades in various countries where the West has run these programs that are essentially filters, right? We are looking for people who are ready to work with us, for us, and for what we want. And that's what's really happening here, right? And I personally have become very understanding of governments that legislate limits to these NGOs, right? And in the case of Georgia, for instance, that's what they did. And it's not anti actually, their law about NGOs is very moderate. But you should have seen, this is about a year ago, the enormous backlash they got. And the backlash wasn't due to the law. The law was really moderate. It was caricatured as being like the Russian law, which it isn't. And the Russian law isn't so bad either, by the way. No, the backlash was due to the fact that all these political interests were touched, that they actually saw the threat. And even in the backlash, you could tell, yeah, this is true. There's a lot at stake here, and it's politics, and that's why the fight is so fierce.
Yes. Tarik, we always do this show 1 hour, and I had to bring this personal story, so we will jump just 2 minutes more over this because this is an important video which I watched this week on X, and it comes from a very pro-EU, pro-Ukraine activist. Her name is Mariska Den Elden. She says German television now openly debating the development of nuclear weapons as well as a European army that could act independent of Washington. CDU leader Spahn came out in favor. Europeanizing France's nuclear arsenal floated as an option as well. Let's take a look.
Wir brauchen jetzt eine europäische Armee. Also das, was bisher gelaufen ist, jedes Land hat seine eigene Armee und dann am besten noch seine eigene Beschaffung und seinen eigenen Rüstungskonzern und nie hat man irgendwie Skalenerträge gehabt, also nie hat man irgendwie auf Größe, auf Masse gesetzt. Das wird sich alles ändern. Und was ja jetzt auch schon losgeht, und das ist aus meiner Sicht nötig, und ich hätte nie gedacht, dass ich als Tatzler das sagen würde. Europa braucht auch Atomwaffen. Denn Russland ist eine Atommacht. Und wenn jetzt Trump sagt, ja, hier, du kannst sie ja angreifen, dann sagt er ja nichts anderes als, ich habe auch Atomwaffen, aber für Europa werde ich die nicht losschicken. Und damit die ganze Sicherheitsarchitektur von zwei Großmächten, die sich mit ihren Atomwaffen in Schach halten, bricht zusammen. Und die einzige Antwort ist, dann braucht Europa Atomwaffen. Und das ist ja etwas, was Macron auch schon immer als französischer Präsident ins Spiel gebracht hat, nämlich zu sagen, hier, wir haben französische Atomwaffen, die können wir doch europäisieren. Was den Hintergrund hat, Atomwaffen sind richtig, richtig teuer, nicht nur in der Anschaffung, sondern auch in der Wartung. Und natürlich ist es eigentlich vernünftig, das europäisch aufzustellen. Dafür hatte Deutschland bisher nie Interesse, aber das wird sich auch ändern. So, und die andere Frage natürlich, die läuft ja immer mit, was machen wir mit der Ukraine? Denn der Krieg wird sich ja hinziehen und wer weiß, ob dann Trump noch zahlen wird. Das wird sich ja jetzt sowieso erstmal zeigen. Und da braucht man natürlich auch irgendwie einen Plan und auch Geld.
So this is a German journalist, guys. She says that Europe needs nuclear weapons, and because Russia has nuclear weapons, and she wants to Europeanize the French nuclear weapons. I don't know what to ask about this, but it seems more journalists becoming hawkish nowadays.
No, but look, this is Taz, right? And I think we should say this for people who may not be from Germany. Taz used to be a very, very long time ago a left-wing newspaper. And what's left of that, they have basically they've gone through the same development as the German Green Party. Taz used to be left and pacifist and all that. Now Taz is de facto very right-wing. They will not admit this, but they are. And they're extremely bellicist. They love war, especially against the Russians. That's Taz. So when this, I think, extremely superficial woman says, I, as a Tatzler, as somebody from Taz, am saying this, that's ridiculous. This is exactly what Taz now stands for, right-wing bellicism, right? But it is also representative. I'm not saying that she isn't typical of a much broader set of German politics and public opinion. Unfortunately, it's absolutely true that Germany has seen a revived interest and a public discussion and a political discussions about nuclear weapons. There's a lot to say about this, but let me just say two things. First of all, for Germany to get its own and have its own nuclear weapons, Germany would have to leave the non-proliferation treaty. Right? Sometimes people think the Germans have signed the non-proliferation treaty and that means they can't do this. That's not unfortunately true. They can. They just have to leave the treaty. One can leave the treaty, right?
Yes.
If Germany were to do that, it would have all sorts of, I think, very dangerous consequences. There would be ripple-on effects all across Europe. But it's a possibility. Unfortunately, they could do it. Now, the second option is if they don't want to have their own nuclear weapons, there is this idea that Europe, meaning sort of EU, NATO Europe, right, would have a nuclear force. Right now in Europe, only the British and the French have nuclear weapons. Their arsenals aren't big, but they are, substantial enough to not to tangle with, right? You don't want this flying towards you and your cities. The problem is that this person doesn't really understand what she's talking about. Macron, the French president, is making noises, she's right, about Europeanizing the French nuclear force, but he's also always saying, and this is already too complicated for her, that ultimately the decision about nuclear weapons and their use will remain a sovereign French decision. He's not saying, I'm ready to give you my nukes, and other people can now decide, say, Ursula von der Leyen, when to hit the red button, right? This is not happening. It's not happening with the British either. So there are all sorts of cans of worms in that. Now, here's the second thing I would like to tell you, which is I think I can see where this is going, what game is actually being played here. I don't think the person we've seen now actually understands that game. I think she's a pawn in it, but I think I understand the game. The game is this. The German government, people like Friedrich Merz, Jens Spahn from the Conservatives, they will go on droning on about how we must have some European nuclear force. Many Germans, when you ask them in polls, are saying, when you ask them, do you want German nuclear weapons? Over 60% still say no. No German nuclear weapons. If you ask them, do you believe in European nuclear weapons? You get exactly the same answer, yes. Over 60% say, oh, yes, European nuclear weapons, right? So you look at this from the point of view of a German politician who wants to get to nuclear weapons. How do you finagle this? How do you manipulate the situation? You do the following. You build some sort of European system, right? It's not just the French, not just the British. You do something European. And in the second step, you then start saying, but look, if all of Europe makes a contribution to our nuclear deterrence, how can we, the Germans, just stand aside and profit? And when you read carefully what people like Friedrich Merz and Spahn are actually saying, they're going exactly there. Yes. Spahn is talking about German leadership. How can you claim leadership in European nuclear deterrence if you yourself are not contributing nuclear weapons? It's impossible. So sooner or later, surprise, surprise, Germans will be told in their talk shows, well, now that we are going toward European nuclear common deterrence, of course, we have an obligation to build some nuclear weapons. But we won't even acquire them officially. We will just build them and field them, but then they become European. And within this European setup, we will be the leaders. Ooh, bingo. And that is, of course, a very old German move. That is the oldest. This is an old West German move. If your sovereignty is reduced because you've behaved so badly in 2 world wars, right? Don't go directly for reacquiring sovereignty, right? You go through Europe. You say Europe needs power, Europe needs to do this, Europe needs to do that, and then you manipulate Europe from inside. Either you do it quietly or you become loud about it, like now, and you say, but we are the leaders in Europe. See how this works?
I think this is exactly what it will happen. Yeah.
I think that's what they want to do. I think that's what they want to do.
Time will tell, as one of our friends keeps saying on X, and he turns out to be correct every time. I just wanted to share, I don't know if we can see him now, another photo. No, we cannot see Zois. He's laying. He's looking at me in a manner that, how dare you sitting there and not taking me out? Yalla, we're going out now. He goes out 3 times per day, and it's his time now to go out. So he keeps looking at me. Today is really warm here. Tarik, thank you so much, really, for these great insights. I mean, if I can just copy you all the comments and stick it on the walls, you will see how many people are grateful for your deep insights on different manners, especially when it comes to the global geopolitics. We all appreciate you, and thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. Every one of you, whether on YouTube, on Rumble, or on Ganjin World. And special thanks to our dear friend Red Axis for moderating the live chat always brilliantly. So this is going to be the end of this week, guys. And the next show is going to be, of course, on Monday at the same time, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you, upon your families. We see you. Salam. Bye.